Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Yeah. So we're always going to go after phishing. We're always going to go after social engineering. We're always going to go after, USB drops and those types of things.
Hello and welcome. Please come in. Join me. I'm Jonathan Crow, Director of Community at Ninja One, and this is IT Horror Stories. Brought to you by Ninja One, the leader in automated endpoint management. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of IT Horror Stories. I'm your host, Jonathan Crow, Director of Community at Ninja One, and our guest today is DrZeroTrust himself, Dr. Chase Cunningham. Chase, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me here. It's always good to talk with people, especially when we're talking about horror stories. What more fun is there?
Well, I know you've seen your fair share. From a unique perspective, for those listening in, Chase has a very unique perspective and comes to the show with a ton of background expertise and experience. More than 20 years in cyber forensics and analytic operations, including time with the Navy, NSA, a ton of different companies, now doing red teaming and pen testing. You definitely bring a macro view of things. You see the bigger picture. Our subject of the day, horror stories. There's a lot of stuff in your background, I'm sure, that you can and that you cannot talk about with your background in the government and everything. Tell us a little bit about, before we dive into your specific story, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into this world.
Yeah, so I'm a retired Navy chief. I was a cryptologist for my career. Then I got medically retired and went over and transitioned and was a government civilian for a bit with some different agencies. Then I was at Forrester Research and built out some of their zero trust practice, like formalized it. And then from there on, I've been a consultant and then a G2 more recently, but I've also managed to get a PhD and 6 or 7 patents, and I'm working on my 8th book right now. So I stay busy, I guess.
You certainly do. You also have your own podcast, the DrZeroTrust podcast.
Yeah, I that's been a passion project. I started that 4 years ago, and it's just fun. It's I don't know about you, but I think podcasting is kind of cathartic. And hey, if people listen, great. If they don't, then I'm just screaming into the ether anyway. So what's it matter?
Great way to talk to interesting people too. I mean, that's what I'm getting out of this right now.
You meet good people, and every once in a while you run into somebody at an airport or something that says, "Oh, I listen to your stuff." That's always awesome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again for taking the time. Let's get into the horror stories. And what I think is so exciting about this episode, me personally, what makes me so excited about it is we have been talking with IT leaders who are in operations roles, who are, their idea of facing a horror story is a little bit different from your perspective, going back to your red teaming days. Basically, we're bringing you in, we're flipping the script essentially, and I'm interested in getting your perspective. What's a horror story look like for an attacker?
Yeah, I mean, I think the funny thing is a horror story for an attacker is when an organization has aligned on actually doing the things that they read about in best practices and has the controls in place that are sort of built on removing the adversary's ability to be successful, it gets really nasty really fast. And, as a red team guy, we don't want to work hard, to be perfectly frank. Like we've got lots of easy targets. If we get in there and we find out that they've taken care of the majority of difficult things, it gets really boring really quick, and you want to go on and do other things. I've been on engagements before where we got kicked off on a red team op, and 2 days in, we didn't find any of the stuff we typically would want to find, and we realized it was going to be a losing battle, and we just say, "Cool, we're done. Here's the report, and I'll catch you later," because it's not worth it. And I think that's the horror story for the adversary is if it's a difficult enterprise and they've put things in place that they know they should, it makes it very difficult. And then you just don't, why fish in a pond where there's no fish? I'd rather go where there's lots of fish, where I can fish with dynamite.
Well, let's bring this into like the horror, sticking with our theme here, from the horror movie perspective. Talking with you is kind of like we get the viewpoint of, you are the person out there looking in at the cabin, basically, and you're waiting and watching for the teenagers who are partying and leaving the door open, and one goes out and says, "I'll be right back."
I'll be right back.
So what are the things, if we're going to carry that analogy further, what are some of the things when you get in there that you start looking for? What are the weak points that you're starting to pressure test first?
I mean, number one, we're always going to go after is we're always going to go after people because people are, it's not that they're the weakest link. It's just that people have got so much going on and that their ability to kind of continually stay up on the many different ways that you can exploit them is pretty minimal. So we're always going to go after phishing. We're always going to go after social engineering. We're always going to go after, USB drops and those types of things. Wireless systems are a red teamer's best friend. Most people don't ever think about, you buy a wireless printer nowadays and connect it up to your internet or the network at the office. They typically have default settings that talk out to the, world writ large. I can Google the common usernames and passwords for Kyocera and HP and all those cats. What's on your printer network? The same stuff on the rest of your network. You can get through there as well. Typically, you don't have to do crazy 0-day level type exploits to win. You just go after the low-hanging fruit and kind of work your way through the process, and you'll find something along those ways. I can't recall a single time where I've ever been in any space where we even have to do much as far as like crafting exploits. It's usually off the shelf, fire and forget, and target what you're going to target, and something works.
This is one thing that I've noticed with a lot of the coverage and everything. I mean, obviously, media is going to react to the big nation state attacks and 0 days, and even the things we see where, oh, there's a hacker that hacks self-driving cars and things like that. And now AI, of course. But when you see the actual incidents that are coming through, and you talk to pen testers, I mean, a lot of it's just the basics, right? It's the bread and butter stuff.
I mean, there's a reason that the Verizon DBIR and the Mandiant M-Trends have had social engineering, phishing, and credential management as the number 1, 2, and 3 exploit vectors for the last 10 years in a row. It's because it works. So, I'm a data geek. I live, eat, sleep, and breathe data. And if I look at the trends and it's the same stuff for a decade, probably a good place to start focusing my controls around.
If you're watching horror movies, you've got the classic, the almost cliche things, right? Like you're screaming at the person, don't go down to the basement. You're an idiot. What are you doing? You're probably doing the same thing. Don't pick up that USB drive. Best practices out there. You'd think that'd be common knowledge by now. Don't use those things. It's still super effective.
Still super effective. It's funny because I've been back and forth with people about the efficacy of phishing training and whatever else and social engineering. I had a guy that runs a company that does that, and I said, I'll bet you my year's salary that you can line up I'll line up some guys on a test the day after you do training and we'll get access. He wouldn't take the bet. To me, that speaks volumes.
So let's talk about dive into more of what a horror story looks like for you in that perspective, the red teaming, the adversary perspective. Do you have a particular incident that you were involved in where you got in and it really started making your day a bad day as an adversary or as a red teamer?
Yeah, I mean, we did a red team test on a government provider, and the thing was we got in really easy, but once we got in, there was nowhere to go. And it was one of those ones where everybody just kind of sat around the table looking at each other like, okay, now what? And, we tried and poked around and we realized that we were giving ourselves away, which you don't ever want to do. We know that we were setting off alarms, and the folks on the other side of the wall that were doing the blue team side, I mean, we could hear them kind of giggling and laughing at us. And it was like, all right, number one, the pride is getting hurt. Number two, I got other things to do. So we just wound up packing our bags and leaving and saying, or push the chess boards off the board like you guys won.
Are there specific things then that you would recommend? It sounds like you're talking about segmentation, taking out, doing least privilege, things like that.
Least privilege access, segmentation, browser isolation. Training is good because it does help, but it's not a technical control. Removing application accesses, removing people's ability to be admin on machines. All the stuff that we've written about in the best practices for 20 years that people still go, well, I wonder if we should do this. Like, no, it's called a best practice for a reason. It's not because somebody woke up and was like, how can I just, put things on a piece of paper. It's a best practice because it's a practice that's best.
You're coming from that red team mentality, so you do have the things where obviously you want to succeed and have useful things that you can be sharing. You want to be able to hack into systems, identify weak points. You want to be able to actually pwn systems, right? But at the end of the day, you want to do that because you want to be able to educate and help these folks improve. And so let's turn it around a little bit. And what are some of the horror stories you've seen in terms of here's an engagement where or where you're consulting or you're doing red teaming, you've come in and you've seen something where, wow, this is a true nightmare. These guys have so much to fix.
Well, one of the biggest ones was a pretty large enterprise organization that had I guess you call it their crown jewels on a data center that was on site, like internal to the building. And of course, they had other stuff outside of it, but it was supposedly secure facility, but it wasn't. After actually at happy hour time, I went to the bar down the street and I just found some random person there, and I was like, "Look, man, I'll give you $100 if you come with me right now." And we worked our way past the people at the front door and everywhere else, and we sent the CEO and board pictures of us chilling out in the data center inside of the building. And it took, I don't know, 35, 40 minutes to do that and get there. So it was one of those ones of going like, here we are. I mean, this is your data center. Like, we can switch network cables if we want to.
And that must be terrifying for leadership of an org to hear, because it's also one of those things where that's not going to get solved by just buying the next tool that's recommended on G2, right?
Yeah, it's not going to be something that's solved very easily. And the interesting thing was just the fact that they've put so much kind of faith in the basic, simple physical controls when it doesn't take much to get past that. If you can throw in some urgency or you can make people a little uncomfortable, it's amazing what they'll allow to happen. I think the one that I saw online that was one of the best was a lady calling to get somebody's password, and she had a recording of a baby crying, and nobody likes to hear a baby cry. And just hearing that, the person on the other end was like, "Oh, I can understand, you're stressed, your baby's crying, here, let me help you out." And that's all it took.
How do you think this has changed your perspective on security in general through the past 20 plus years?
Yeah, it's one of those ones where I think people should abandon the idea of perfect security because it doesn't exist. You think if you're postured up and you've spent enough money and you've got the right things in place that you're not going to have a breach. The odds of you not having a breach are really, really slim. It's just a matter of time. That doesn't mean that you stop trying, but it just means to be aware of when things go wrong, what is your plan? How will you isolate? How will you minimize the damage? How do you move, or how do you stop lateral movement, et cetera? And then also, seeing what I've worked with people on ransomware planning. If you've never been through a ransomware incident or planned for it, you should, because when the ish hits the fan, people will change the way that they work with each other. And the last thing that you want is the boardroom throwing stuff across the board table because they're not ready to respond to a ransomware event.
For a lot of folks, the ultimate horror story that keeps them up at night is the ransomware scenario. I mean, it's so prevalent now too, right? And I think when we were talking about it, you brought up the famous Mike Tyson quote, right?
Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't one of my folks I worked with, but I was working with some people that were tangentially tied to a major city down south, and they had an offer from a vendor that would have secured the systems from the perspective of basic sort of ransomware controls. I think the cost was going to be about $75K, and the city leadership said no, we can't afford that. And I think it was about a month and a half later they got hit, and the ransom was $15 million. $70K sounds good now, doesn't it?
Do you think hearing more stories like that and having the headline, these things appear in the headlines, do you think it's made any kind of impact? I mean, or are we just going to be living these horror stories and seeing people still make the same moves over and over and over again?
I mean, apathy is a real thing. There's people that still, don't buckle up their seatbelts. There's people that smoke cigarettes. There's folks that, swim with sharks. I mean, you can't fix people, but hopefully the majority of us can start, moving forward. And I think we're seeing that there's some effort and some gravitas to the movement as far as strategic approaches to security that makes sense. So, it's not all doom and gloom, but there are still people that just kind of go like, I don't think this is applicable to me. Small businesses are usually the worst at it, because why would somebody target my business? Well, it's not you, honestly. It's the fact that you're connected to others. That's what we want to get to. You've got a contract or you've got information or whatever else. And, if it's, I always ask people when they say, why would I be of value? I say, do you make money from your business? Then it's valuable.
We're talking about having that attacker perspective. If it's easy enough, I mean, why not? And then, yeah, you see where you can get to from there.
Ransomware is the best retirement plan anybody ever came up with. The top 3 ransomware groups are making hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So I mean, personally, I think I'm in the wrong organization. I should be retired to some beach in Russia. I don't know are there beaches in Russia, but yeah.
Well, and you mentioned, I mean, having all that money. I mean, I know Kevin Beaumont had an article maybe a couple years ago about just, man, calling the stark challenge of, okay, now you've got these groups with that amount of funding to do things if they wanted to with exploit, development and purchasing and all that. But as you pointed out, a lot of times they don't even need to.
It's funny too because recently, and this is public knowledge, the drug cartels in Mexico have started transitioning a lot of their ops over to cybercrime because there's less risk, there's almost no attribution, the odds of them getting arrested are nearly zero, and it's kind of maximum bang for their buck. So they've gotten to a point where they are literally changing their business operations and saying, like, we'll have a unit that does shipping cocaine across the border, and we'll have cybercrime, and we'll make money on both ends of it because it is very doable and it is commoditized and it is almost guaranteed income.
Switching over to maybe not the all doom and gloom, the hope, right? Folks use the phrase impose cost. And goes back to your concept of, well, if you see someone with a clear security system or locked doors, you're going to, why try to rob that house? We can go down the street and get the one that doesn't. What are some top things that you could recommend that would help in that regard?
The basics, and really apply them intelligently. General Greg Tuhill is a great friend of mine and a mentor, and one of his sayings is, if everything is a priority, nothing is. And that's what I mean to folks to understand is not everything is a priority. You probably read about it in the media and the news, and it seems like, oh my God, how will I ever keep up with this? Look at the trends and the data and the information that tells you where attacks are likely to occur and where they're likely to be successful, and apply controls there. And you're making yourself a harder target. And to your point, I don't have to have 50 cals mounted on my roof and claymores in the driveway. If I've got a Doberman, it'll make you think twice. So just doing those things does make stuff valuable. And the only other one I would put out there is, don't rely on humans not to be humans. Like, we're people, and non-security people don't want to do security things. Your security technology should be pretty close to magic. It should just do the thing, and they shouldn't get wrapped up around it. If your security tech makes people miserable, they will find a way around it because we're humans. That's just what we do. So work your way towards that too. And the only last thing I would say is just, it's okay to tell your people, especially if you're doing phishing training or whatever else. There are some people that you just have to say, like, look, man, I got to put some additional controls around you because you're prone to clicking, bro. Like, I don't know what to tell you, man, but I got to do something about you. And it's not because I don't like you and I don't like your hair color or whatever else, but you're a risk to my business. And I either put more controls around you or I let you go. Which one do you want?
You could frame it like, hey, we're here to help,
It's like, you work for me at this business and I want us to be successful, but there's a risk here. And I mean, that's one reason why I would say it's always good to have data to back it up. Like, look, we did a phishing training simulation last month, and out of everyone in the company, you were the one that fell for the same thing twice. So it's not meant to be, focused on you. It's just, this is what's up. And I want you to keep working here, but I'm going to just, help you be a little bit more secure.
And going back again to the horror story analogy, you tend to find types of characters, and you tend to see the same ones over and over again, the archetypes of characters in horror movies. Are there types in organizations that you've seen that have suffered IT horror stories, particularly security incidents? Whether it's leadership who just aren't seeing the value in risk analysis and security, or anything like that. Any stock characters that you could call out?
I would say usually the higher up in the C-suite you talk to, the worse they are about this whole thing. Like, they're the people that are going to have the most access, they're going to have the most privilege, they're also going to have the most data available to them, and they're going to be the people that are of the most value, like the whales. But those people, for some reason, I'm the CEO. I need to have admin access to whatever. Are you the developer? Then no, I'm not giving it to you. Oh, I'm a chairman of the board. I blah blah blah. Like, I'm great. It's not going to make me any taller or more money, so I'm not going to do this for you. Like, there's those folks that just think that they need to have it because of their title or position, and really all that is doing is introducing risk. And you have to find a way to remove and minimize that risk. And those are usually the worst, as far as just the folks that'll fight you tooth and nail. The other one that stands out too a lot of times is, and it's not to knock on them, but it's just developers are tasked with moving so much stuff so fast that they have no problem hard coding and embedding things that they know are potentially risky into systems and then shipping it. Because if I'm paid to ship code, baby, we're shipping code. If it goes sideways on the far end of it, I didn't realize that was there. I mean, there's always that, by the time 75 people have contributed one block of code, it's kind of hard to track down who screwed up.
In your experience, both internally at organizations and also consulting, red teaming, you deliver your report. Here are your findings. Here are recommendations. Do you get to stick around to see how orgs have responded to those? I mean, is that part of the horror story too of how much people do or don't react to those things?
Yeah, there's been the orgs that are good about it, and they'll have you come back and run the same simulation or test again, and they want to see if they fix the holes that you put in front of them. And I've had a lot that have done that. Then I've also had a lot of them where say, thank you very much. They file it with a compliance report, and they get the lawyers off their back and go on about doing what they were doing with total disregard for what we put in front of them. And it's a sad state of affairs, but it does happen more often than I would like, just because people will, again, the apathy side of it is, I got to be compliant to do business. I got to have this red team test or this pen test. I did it. Thank you very much. And that's good enough.
The checkbox approach, basically.
Compliance does not equal security. I remind people that every organization that's had a breach had just checked a compliance initiative somewhere.
Any suggestions for the folks who are there at orgs who are champions of, they want to do the right thing, they want to see their org improve, they may be facing various headwinds. How can they be better champions of security within their organizations?
This is where I think we in the security community have done ourselves a bit of a disservice, is we've made this where it's such a sexy, cool hacker world with all our crazy acronyms and whatever. We need to move away from that and really get to where we're talking business with people. And that is what resonates. And then the other piece too is tying it to something that's actually of value for whoever's involved. And I don't mean like value as far as the particular, it's going to cost us $1 million if we get breached. Like, what is the value of what we're doing for this business that is going to be at risk if we get hit up? Is it we're going to be down for 6 weeks and we're probably going to go out of business, and the 35 employees we have here will lose their jobs, plus their families will lose healthcare coverage? Like, being able to really speak to the bigger, higher calling is very useful too. I work with, I do a lot of pro bono advisory stuff with like old people and women's shelters and stuff like that on security controls. And it's funny because they're usually more willing to try and dive in on security than people that have the job of security controls inside of an organization.
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, they're just more appreciative of the help, you think?
Oh, well, that, and they realize that there's a value to it. Like, if you're, an older person and you're living off your retirement and your retirement gets bricked, like, that's a big bad deal.
We do see companies make headlines, and then you look at the stock price later and it's like, well, I guess they got off the hook. I mean, there is an element to that too that's hard to kind of shake off.
That's why I think the penalties that we have in the whole system, like all the compliance initiatives and all that whatever else, like, it's just it's comical in nature. Honestly, I literally have a hashtag I put out on my podcast about buy the breach, because it's good for companies at the large enterprise level to get breached. Stock values do better. So, it's the cost of doing business. If you can survive that initial hit, wait 6 months and your stock value will be up from where it was. And that to me speaks volumes about, how this whole market is set up.
Man, a lot of the other folks we've been talking to, and a lot of the audience too, may not be security specialists, right? They're IT leaders. Of course, a lot of their job involves the actual applying of security controls, and security is top of mind, obviously. But do you have any recommendations for those folks? Because what you were saying about security, so much of it can be seen as, well, you do everything right, and what's the result? Nothing happens. And so it's hard to get the value, really underscore the value of that, right?
Yeah.
And I think IT people can feel the same way. If they're doing their jobs right, they're basically invisible. And they have to actually be more proactive and consciously, intentionally work at, hey, here's what we're doing and why it's valuable to the business.
Yeah, security is one of those ones where if you're doing your job right, there is no real outcome, and that's weird to even say. But if everything goes perfectly, no one knows what went down, and it's just regular business for the sake of business. I think if you go back and look at the CIA prior to 9/11, no one knows about the 1,000 times the CIA saved us from bad things. Everybody knows about the one screw up, and unfortunately, that's just kind of the way it goes. So there are ways to translate that around and sort of thing. I think one thing too that I've seen security leadership do that is valuable for them is if your strategy is correct and you're adapting and improvising and doing the right things, over time you should be able to free up budget instead of continually asking for more and spending more money on things that aren't actually doing anything for you.
Yeah, you never want to be that guy who you walk into the boss's office and they're basically like, well, what do you want now? How much
Well,
money do you want now?
yeah, the days of CISOs getting blank checks are over. I mean, you've got to have a strategy now, and you've got to have a way to get it. And I mean, if I had a nickel for every org I worked with where they had 2 or 3 of the same thing solving the same problem, there's plenty of way to free up that money.
So Chase, any other words you'd want to share for IT leaders, security folks too, heading into this year? Words of advice, words of encouragement, anything you want to share?
I mean, I think the words of encouragement I would say is that the space is in a spot where there's vendors that have capabilities that can help you enable a strategy that will reduce the likelihood of a compromise. Is it going to stop a breach? No, but is it going to likely reduce compromise? And by compromise, I mean continual bad things happening based on access. And you can use those solutions. And if you adopt a strategy that's based on reality and actually apply the controls where the bad guys are going to meet you, you'll do better on the far end. The caution I would say is that we, as the good guys, do not own the patent on security tech or security solutions. The adversaries are using those to figure out how to get past it and work ways around it. And AI, whatever you want to call it, ML, is only expediting that process. So you're in an arms race, unfortunately. It's good because you probably won't be unemployed, but it's also, the reality of you're in an arms race and the race is not over.
It can be humbling, it can be discouraging, but it's also, like you said, I mean, I think if you really switch your mindset to it, it's not a bad thing at the end of the day. I mean, it's just it's the job.
I would also tell people, don't be a cybersecurity black belt. And what I mean by that is if you've ever been anybody that's in martial arts or fighting, there's always those cats that have got a black belt, but they've never actually been in a street fight. And the moment they get in a street fight, things go sideways really, really quickly. Go and get in a street fight. Bring in red teamers. Bring in folks that can come at you the way the adversary does. And then you'll see what your posture actually looks like. Because until you've tested it, it's just a really good guess. And that is not where you want to be, is a really good guess.
And we're huge advocates of tabletopping, not just with security either, but with IT operations. How would you handle downtime of any kind of nature? How do you handle the really hairy, unexpected circumstances? We really want to encourage people to sit down with their teams and take time to do those things. Also talk with folks like yourself. I mean, that's part of the mission of this podcast. And also, I'm sure part of the goal, what makes it so important to work with pen testers and red teamers, bringing in the adversaries who are not true adversaries to get that pressure tested before the real thing happens.
Yeah, test your board too. I mean, I do workshops with folks and I kick the C-suite leadership out of the room. I want to deal with the board and see what they do. Because, I mean, people don't give enough credence to how much influence and how much activity the board is going to impose upon you when things start going sideways. So test the board. You're well within your rights to be like, if you're a board member, I want to throw you into the mix and see how you deal with this.
If only I could be a fly in the wall for those scenarios. I'm sure people, it's been interesting to say the least.
It gets ugly.
Because I'm sure they're too, like, they're probably not used to this, right? They've never gone through this experience in a lot of times.
Yeah, and most of the time, what's interesting is you find that they talk a really big game, and they've got all this experience and whatever else. But the moment they're staring down the barrel of it, it changes stuff. And stress doesn't really come into play until stress comes into play. When I do scenarios with people, I learned from the military. I like to continually increase your stress and see how that drives your response.
Well, Chase, thank you so much for taking time and giving your unique perspective about what it's like to deal with a IT scenario that turns into a horror story and how to prevent them, and also how to prepare to make sure you're actually ready to handle that stress when the real thing hits. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun. Anytime we get to talk, war stories, I'm always in for it.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of IT Horror Stories. For even more information and resources on how you can beat IT misery and transform your IT, check out ninja1.com. Also, in case you missed it, check out the recording of Backups and Bandwidth, our D&D inspired tabletop exercise that we put on for World Backup Day. We had a party of IT experts face a diabolical backup disaster scenario and rise to recovery. Head over to youtube.com at ninja1.official for more. That's all for this week. We'll be back with more soon.